Hello students, in the continuity of indifference curve and this lecture I will explain about properties of indifference curve. The first property of indifference curve, it is about the slope of curve. The curve is downward sloping from left to right. Indifference curve is always sloping downward from left to right, or we can say that the slope of IC, slope of indifference curve, it is negative. The question should be arisen in your mind that why do indifference curve is downward sloping, or why the slope of IC is negative. Okay, so remember we discussed that slope of IC can be calculated by change in Y, change in consumption of Y divided by change in consumption of X. Okay, and here we will calculate the change by Y2 minus Y1 divided by X2 minus X1. And in this graph I have explained it that assume it is our indifference curve. This is point A and this is point C. From A to C, a consumer is moving from A to C. To move from A point to C point, consumer is changing his consumption from 2 to 5. His level of consumption is 2 and 5. 2 units he is consuming for X and 5 units he is consuming for Y. At level C, 3 and 3. Both X and Y, 3 units he is consuming for both. Okay. Here from A, first point, at point A, he is consuming 2 units of X and 5 units of Y. And at C, he is consuming 3 units of X and 3 units of Y. Then what is Y2 minus Y1? Y2 is 5 to 3. Okay. He reduced his consumption from 5 units to 3 units. So, the change in the consumption of Y, that is equal to Y2 minus Y1. It means 3 minus 5 divided by change in consumption of X. What is the change in consumption of Y? From A, after reaching C point, from A point, he increased his consumption for X and he reaches from 2 to 3 unit. So, the change in X, consumption of X is 3 minus 2. So, what will be this equation? 3 minus 5, that is equals to minus 2 divided by 1, and we will get minus 2. So, hence proved that the slope of indifference curve is negative. Just like this. You can take other example. Okay. So, it means we can easily understand that slope of indifference curve is showing that if a consumer wanted to increase the consumption of X, he has to reduce the consumption of Y, because this curve is showing indifferent preference. Indifferent preference means all the combinations are giving same level of satisfaction. None of the combination is giving lesser or none of the combination is giving higher satisfaction. The satisfaction level remains on the same level. Okay. So, to remain on the same satisfaction level, if consumer is increasing consumption of Y, in term of increasing satisfaction from getting consumption of X, so he has to sacrifice the consumption of Y, or he has to reduce the satisfaction deriving from the consumption of Y. Clear that? Understood? Next property. Second property of indifference curve is slope of IC is MRS. What is the full form of MRS? MRS stands for marginal rate of substitution. slope of IC is same as MRS, or MRS is same as slope of IC. Okay, MRS means marginal rate of substitution. By putting the formula to get the slope of IC, MRS is equal to delta y upon delta S. Okay, how do you define the term MRS or marginal rate of substitution? This can be asked in very short answer type questions, or the question from this topic, it may be like explain the slope of indifference curve with the help of a tabular presentation and a graphical presentation. Okay, so you have to show all these things with the definition also. MRS defined as, or MRS shows the amount of good y. This is marginal rate of substitution. अगर कहीं पर भी किसी भी टर्म में if there is the word marginal, it means we are increasing any commodity, any consumption, any production, any utility by 1 unit. Okay, understood this? Understand this कि marginal means change by increasing. Okay, by increasing 1 unit or by decreasing 1 unit. So marginal rate of substitution, it means we are substituting any consumption of one commodity. But what is it? MRS shows the amount of good y that the consumer is willing to give up. That the consumer is willing to give up for getting one more consumption, one more unit of good X. This is called marginal rate of substitution. Okay, again I am telling you, marginal rate of substitution means a consumer, whatever is sacrificing by the units of y for getting more units of X, that is equals to marginal rate of substitution. Consumer want to increase the consumption of X, so he has to sacrifice by some units of Y. That sacrificing units are equals to marginal rate of substitution. X को बढ़ाने के लिए, X का ज़्यादा कंजम्पशन करने के लिए Y की कितनी यूनिट्स को कंज्यूमर छोड़ रहा है, ठीक है, कितनी यूनिट्स को कंज्यूमर सेक्रीफाइस करता है, दैट इज कॉल्ड मार्जिनल रेट ऑफ सब्स्टिट्यूशन. Indifference curve slope can be easily understood with the help of this graphical presentation. In this graph, this is indifference curve and this is combination A, this is combination C, and consumer on A and C, consumer is getting equal satisfaction, as this is the condition for indifference curve that any combination will give. If we want to take any combination, it will give the equal satisfaction to the consumer. So on A point consumer will, and at C point the consumer will get equal level of satisfaction on both these points. Okay, दोनों ही points पर उसका satisfaction level जो है वो equal रहना चाहिए, तभी ये indifference curve होगा. तो equal satisfaction के लिए कंज्यूमर का जो कंजम्पशन है X के लिए दैट इज 2 यूनिट, Y के लिए दैट इज 5 यूनिट्स, एंड एट C कंज्यूमर वांट्स टू इंक्रीज द कंजम्पशन ऑफ X. वो 2 से 3 यूनिट्स को इंक्रीज कर रहा है, 2 to 3 यूनिट्स ही इज गेटिंग फॉर कंजम्पशन ऑफ X. तो यहाँ जैसे ही X का कंजम्पशन बढ़ा, तो अगर Y का कंजम्पशन कम नहीं होगा एंड ही इज गेटिंग मोर X, तो उस कंडीशन में उसका सेटिस्फैक्शन लेवल क्या होगा, इंक्रीज हो जाएगा. सो वो लेवल को कम करने के लिए X का अगर उसने बढ़ाया है, तो बढ़े हुए सेटिस्फैक्शन को कम करने के लिए हम उससे Y का कंजम्पशन क्या करेंगे, कम कर देंगे. तो यहाँ पर आपका जो Y का कंजम्पशन है वो कम हो गया है. और ये कम क्यों किया जा रहा है, अगेन एंड अगेन आई एम टेलिंग यू टू रिमेन ऑन द सेम सेटिस्फैक्शन लेवल. सेटिस्फैक्शन का लेवल सेम रखने के लिए कंज्यूमर का कंजम्पशन जब एक कमोडिटी के लिए इंक्रीज करते हैं, तो दूसरी कमोडिटी के लिए उसी कंजम्पशन को हम कम कर देते हैं. That's why the slope of indifference curve is downward and the slope is known as marginal rate of substitution. Okay? The next property for indifference curve is the convexity of indifference curve. Our third property is indifference curve is convex to the origin. Okay. Why there is convexity of indifference curve to the origin? It is because the marginal rate of substitution, that is MRS, is declining for every successive unit. Okay. Marginal rate of substitution is declining for every successive unit of good X, as the consumer is willing to sacrifice less and less of good Y to increase more of good X. Okay. In simple words, we can say that IC is convex to the origin because marginal rate of substitution is decreasing. Here I am using down arrow for increasing and using up arrow for increase. Okay. So the marginal rate of substitution is decreasing. This is the reason for the convexity of indifference curve. Next is explanation of this term. As more and more unit of good X, as a consumer is increasing more and more unit of good X, okay, for the consumption, his intensity to desire for a good X will reduce. It will tends to decline. अगर आपको भी कोई एक चीज़ assume that you like पनीर very much, okay, आपको अगर पनीर की सब्ज़ी बहुत पसंद है ना, लेकिन आपको सुबह ब्रेकफास्ट में पनीर, लंच में पनीर, डिनर में पनीर, अगर आपको हर दिन हर रोज़ तीनों ही आपके जो मील हैं उनमें आपको पनीर ही दिया जाए तो क्या होगा, ज़्यादा कोई भी एक पर्टिकुलर कमोडिटी का ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा कंजम्पशन will reduce the desire of that particular commodity. It will tends to decline. So same thing is happening here. Okay, as more and more unit of good X is obtaining by the consumer, the intensity of desire for that commodity tends to decline. Okay, and it implies that marginal utility of good X tends to fall. जो हमने first अपना जो cardinal approach, in that cardinal approach we learnt that the law of diminishing marginal utility, that if a person is consuming more and more units of a particular commodity, in that condition the marginal utility getting from that consumption will tends to decline by successive units of consumption. जैसे जैसे आप अपने कंजम्पशन को बढ़ाएंगे आपका मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी जो है वो रिड्यूस होगा. मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी रिड्यूस होने का मतलब है कि हमारा उस पर्टिकुलर कमोडिटी के लिए हमारी जो इंटेंसिटी है, हमारा जो डिज़ायर है उसके कंजम्पशन के लिए इट विल रिड्यूस. ओके, ऑन द अदर हैंड एज मोर एंड मोर यूनिट ऑफ गुड एक्स आर गिवन अप, हम अगर किसी चीज़ को बहुत छोड़ते जाएंगे, आप लंबे टाइम तक अगर कोई चीज़ को कंज्यूम ना करो या आपका कंजम्पशन अगर कोई चीज़ का रिड्यूस हो कंटिन्यूसली, तो आपको उस चीज़ के लिए उसकी जो इंटेंसिटी ऑफ डिज़ायर है आपकी, उस चीज़ को ऑब्टेन करने की जो आपकी इच्छा है वो आपकी बढ़ जाएगी. ओके, योर इंटेंसिटी ऑफ डिज़ायर फॉर गुड टेंड्स टू राइज इफ you will giving up the more and more units of that good. It implies that marginal utility of good Y tends to rise with every additional unit of it being sacrificed. इसको हम easily समझ सकते हैं. कॉन्वेक्सिटी और X का कंजम्पशन बढ़ने पर Y का कंजम्पशन कम होना, we can understand this concept with accordance of law of diminishing marginal utility. कैसे हम समझ सकते हैं? Marginal utility of X, that is the marginal utility deriving from the consumption of X, it tends to decline. Marginal utility of X tends to decline with every additional unit of X is being obtained by consumer. जैसे जैसे कंज्यूमर अपने कंजम्पशन में X को और ज़्यादा ऐड करता है, in that condition with every additional unit that is being obtained by consumer will tends to decline the marginal utility of X. जैसे जैसे हम कोई भी चीज़ को ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा कंज्यूम करेंगे, कंटिन्यूसली हमारा कंजम्पशन उस कमोडिटी के लिए बढ़ेगा, उससे मिलने वाला सेटिस्फैक्शन हमारा रिड्यूस होगा. एंड in case we can say that intensity of desire to get that commodity, to consume that commodity will decline. Other one is marginal utility of Y. MUY tends to rise. Marginal utility of Y tends to rise with every additional unit of Y that is being sacrificed. If we gave up more and more units of Y, in that case the marginal utility of Y will increase and the intensity of desire for the consumption of Y will also increase. तो जैसे जैसे हम X का कंजम्पशन बढ़ाएंगे तो हम लोग Y के कंजम्पशन को कम करते हैं, बट द सैक्रिफाइसिंग यूनिट्स विल रिड्यूस. अर्लियर फर्स्ट कंडीशन में जो हमारा फर्स्ट सैक्रिफाइस था, फर्स्ट केस में जब हमने X का एक यूनिट बढ़ाया 1 to 2 हम आए, तब हमने Y का अज्यूम दैट हमने Y का 4 यूनिट्स को सैक्रिफाइस किया. सेकेंड कंडीशन में हमने X का कंजम्पशन 2 से 3 किया, तो हमने Y का कंजम्पशन जो है वो 4 से पहले सैक्रिफाइस किया था हमने 4 यूनिट. नाउ वी आर सैक्रिफाइसिंग लेस देन 4, 3 यूनिट्स. अब अगले स्टेज में हम फिर से 1 यूनिट ऑफ X वी आर इंक्रीजिंग, बट we will sacrifice less than 3 unit which we have sacrificed in previous case. Okay, now we will sacrifice only 2 units of commodity Y. This is the concept of declining marginal rate of substitution. Next property of indifference curve is higher indifference curve shows higher level of satisfaction. To prove this property or to explain this property, we need indifference map. What is indifference map? I already defined the term indifference curve. Indifference curve is a curve which is showing all those combinations which are giving same level of satisfaction from the consumption of two type of commodities. And IC map is that graphical presentation which is containing more than one indifference curves. Okay, and it means we can say a set of indifference curves drawn in a same graph is known as indifference map. Just like here, on y-axis we have taken good commodity of Y, on x-axis we have taken consumption of commodity X. This one is IC1, this is IC2, this is IC3. There may be more and more graphs in indifference map. In this condition or with the accordance of this property, we can say that higher indifference curve is showing higher level of satisfaction. Okay, here IC1, IC2 and IC3 are placed one above another. IC2 is above than IC1, IC3 is above than IC2. Okay, so we can say accordance with this property that first indifference curve, that is IC1, is showing the lesser in satisfaction level as it is lying the lower, it is lying at the lower situation. Okay, and IC3 is showing the higher level of satisfaction as this indifference curve is at higher position than the other curves. Okay, here we can easily compare all three graphs, all three curves. Like IC1 is showing lesser satisfaction level and IC2 is showing the satisfaction level which is more than IC1. But IC2 is showing less satisfaction level as it is lying below the IC3. Okay, and IC3 is showing the higher satisfaction level than IC2 and IC1. Why it is? Because IC3 is at higher position, or it is situated above than IC1 and above than IC2. That's why we can say that higher indifference curve shows the higher level of satisfaction. Next property is two ICs, two indifference curves never intersect each other. Okay, we are saying that indifference curve is showing, one indifference curve is showing same level of satisfaction. Okay, assume that this is our indifference map. In this map we are showing two type of indifference curves. First one is IC1 and second is IC2. If two indifference curves intersect each other, in that condition we can say that at the point of intersection, this is the point of intersection. This point, intersection point is E. This point is A, this is B. This point, assume that this is C and this is D. Okay? From right to the point of intersection, from right to this point A and point B. Point A is giving higher level of satisfaction than the point B. Same level of satisfaction getting from X and Y for both the curves IC1 and IC2, it is similar. And at point D and C, इंटरसेक्शन पॉइंट से राइट की तरफ कॉम्बिनेशन ए, ये दिस कॉम्बिनेशन इज लाइंग ऑन हायर इंडिफरेंस कर्व, दैट्स व्हाई इट इज प्रोवाइडिंग हायर लेवल ऑफ सेटिस्फैक्शन देन द बी. ओके, ए इज गिविंग हायर लेवल ऑफ सेटिस्फैक्शन. ए ये है आपका, ए जो है वो बी से ज़्यादा सेटिस्फैक्शन दे रहा है. इट मीन्स बी इज गिविंग लेस देन ए. क्लियर? ध्यान रखिएगा, B क्योंकि नीचे वाले इंडिफरेंस कर्व पर है इसलिए ये लेस सेटिस्फैक्शन देगा, एंड A इज लाइंग ऑन हायर लेवल ऑफ इंडिफरेंस कर्व और हायर लेवल ऑफ सेटिस्फैक्शन, दैट्स व्हाई इट इज प्रोवाइडिंग हायर सेटिस्फैक्शन लेवल. नेक्स्ट, D और C को जब हम कंपेयर करते हैं तो D इज प्रोवाइडिंग लेस सेटिस्फैक्शन देन A, एंड B एंड A बोथ D और A ये दोनों ही कर्व जो हैं, ये कौन से पॉइंट्स जो हैं वो IC1 पर सिचुएटेड है. ठीक है, तो IC1 पर सिचुएटेड होने की वजह से इन दोनों का सेटिस्फैक्शन लेवल कैसा होना चाहिए? सेम होना चाहिए. और ये दोनों ही पॉइंट्स किसके ऊपर सिचुएटेड हैं? IC2 पर, तो ये दोनों का सेटिस्फैक्शन सेम होना चाहिए. तो इट इज़ नॉट पॉसिबल दैट वन कॉम्बिनेशन इज गिविंग sometime it is giving higher satisfaction and on the same indifference curve any other combination is giving the lesser satisfaction in comparison to other indifference curve. ठीक है, ये पॉसिबल नहीं है किसी भी कंडीशन में. IC do not cross or intersect each other because in the graphical presentation we are explaining this by point E, that is the point of intersection, and this is to the now we are considering 2 points, that is point A and point B, which is right and above, which is to the right from the point of intersection. Okay, and here C is above the point, sorry, A is above the point B. Okay, it implies that yield higher, A combination is yielding higher satisfaction than point B. But because IC1 and IC2 are intersecting, we get inconsistent result as under that A and B, A and E, sorry, A and E are on IC2 and A and B are on IC1. So it means it is implying that A and B should be equal and A and E should be equal, E and B should be equal. So that is not possible in any condition. Understand? One more time I am explaining. एक बार फिर से मैं आपको बता देती हूँ that two indifference curves never intersect each other. क्यों नहीं इंटरसेक्ट करेंगे कभी भी? रिमेंबर दिस कि IC1 and IC2 in case they intersect or they cross each other, तो ये इनका जो क्रॉसिंग पॉइंट है, इंटरसेक्टिंग पॉइंट है, दैट इज E. हमने अज्यूम किया है, ठीक है. IC1 पर जो पॉइंट्स हैं वो है B, E एंड C. IC2 पर जो पॉइंट है वो है A, E एंड D, ठीक है. अगर हम इसको सिर्फ यही पॉइंट्स को हम कंसीडर करें, हम अगर सारे पॉइंट्स को डिस्कस ना करके सिर्फ इसी को डिस्कस करें, तो पॉइंट E जो दोनों का इंटरसेक्टिंग पॉइंट है, यहाँ पर इन दोनों से मिलने वाला सेटिस्फैक्शन सेम है और वो कौन सा है? E है, ठीक है. और यहाँ पर अगर हम कंपेयर कर रहे हैं तो A पॉइंट जो है वो किस पर है? IC2 पर है और B किस पर है? IC1 पर है. A is on it is lying on IC2 and IC2 is above the IC1, so it's understood that IC2 is giving higher level of satisfaction than the IC1, so that A combination is giving higher consumption, higher satisfaction than point B, ठीक है. तो यहाँ हमने कहा कि IC1 का पॉइंट B कम सेटिस्फैक्शन दे रहा है IC2 के पॉइंट A से, और यहाँ हम कह रहे हैं नेक्स्ट पॉइंट पर कि E जो IC1 पर भी है और IC2 पर भी है, दोनों से मिलने वाला सेटिस्फैक्शन सेम है. तो इट इज़ नॉट पॉसिबल. दोनों ही कर्व्स कभी भी एक जैसा, अलग अलग कर्व्स जो हैं वो कभी भी किसी भी कंडीशन में एक सेटिस्फैक्शन लेवल को शो नहीं करेंगे. तो उस केस में वी कैन से टू इंडिफरेंस कर्व्स नेवर इंटरसेक्ट ईच अदर. Our next property for indifference curves is indifference curves never touch on x-axis and on y-axis. Okay, indifference curve, the shape of indifference curve is convex to the origin, but it never touches on x-axis or on y-axis. Why? Why does it happen? It happens because if indifference curve touches on x-axis, in that condition we can say that on x-axis जहाँ पर ये टच कर रहा है x-axis को, there the consumption of x is here x and the consumption of y is 0 as the point is on x-axis. जब ये x-axis पर पॉइंट पर है, एक्सिस के ऊपर ही आपका फर्स्ट कॉम्बिनेशन है, तो इन दैट केस वी कैन से द कंजम्पशन ऑफ एक्स इज हायर बट द कंजम्पशन ऑफ वाई इज 0. और हमने अजम्पशन लिया था कि कंज्यूमर हमेशा 2 कमोडिटीज़ को कंज्यूम करेगा. इन एनी कंडीशन द कंजम्पशन ऑफ 1 कमोडिटी कांट बी 0, ठीक है. तो यहाँ पर एक्स के कंजम्पशन तो हायर हो रहा है बट वाई का कंजम्पशन कैसा हो रहा है? 0 हो रहा है. दैट इज़ नॉट पॉसिबल. In other case, here IC is touching on y-axis. It means the consumption of y is higher, but the consumption of x is 0, and that is not possible. So we can say that indifference curve never touch on x-axis or on y-axis.